So when it comes to drawing an outline around a 3D object in 3D space, you have a couple of options. One option might be to write a complicated shader that does some edge detection magic and darkens the pixels that are along an edge. And another option might be to draw a solid color, inside out, untextured, unlit copy of the 3D object, slightly offset from the original. If that sounds utterly ridiculous, let me try and win you over by saying that this trick has been used in not only in AAA video games in the past, but also in one of the most artistic games of all time. I am, of course, talking about the legendary Okami. I decided to make some bold claims to start the video today. Okay, hello all you crazy people out there. My name is Michael, I like wizards and dragons and making games, and let's talk about doing outlines in 3D. So the test demo project game thing that I have right now is noticeably less artistic than the legendary Okami, but it'll do for now. So I have a couple of 3D objects which are what will be important. I have a player thing, whatever that even is. I've likened it to things such as the planet Saturn and UFOs in the past. And today we're going to be putting some outlines around these things. So let me close the game, and I'm going to open this game's data files folder and mess around. Let me open up the player object. So I am going to be using Model Creator for GameMaker for this. As usual, you can use Blender if you want, if you prefer that for creating and editing 3D objects. I like Model Creator because it is very simple and lets me work quickly without swearing at my computer left and right. This is what it looks like in the model editor. I am going to save as a copy, and I'm going to call it, let's say, player outline.d3d, just so that I don't mess with the original. And we're going to need to do a few things. The first thing we're going to need to do is flip all the faces inside out. I talked about backface culling in the last video. I did that for a reason, because I wanted to have that as a lead up to this one. If you don't know what backface culling is, you should probably go watch that video. If you do, then you should be caught up to speed and you should know what's going on here. I am going to turn these all inside out. You can hit the flip faces button in Model Creator or hit the F key on the keyboard to do it as a hotkey. And you can see this UFO player Saturn thing has been turned inside out. The faces are now visible from the inside. I can't really get a good look at it from here. The faces are visible from the inside rather than the outside. Let's see, I keep lighting on. I'll turn the edges off. That makes it a little easier to see. Not really. You can kind of see the inside here. It looks like a disco ball now or something. Anyway, the second thing we're going to do is we are going to color all the vertices black. You could make it black, you could make it any other solid color that you want. If you want a blue outline or something, you would make it blue. I'm going to go with black because it's going to probably stand out best against the yellow player when I bring it into the game. And the next thing that I'm going to do is scale it up a little bit. So if I just scale it up from here, it will be scaled relative to the world origin. There's a couple ways you could avoid that. You could set the center position to something else, to whatever the center of the ball is. I am going to just temporarily move this thing here back to the world origin. I guess I can't do that exactly. Okay, fine. You could move it back to the world origin if you want. The center position, it looks like, is 0040. So I'm going to set the center position to 0040 when I scale it, and I will scale it up by about 10%, let's go with. And now I can save the game and minimize that. And I'm going to go back into GameMaker over here, and I have the player being loaded in as a vertex buffer. I'm also going to now load in the player outline 3D model as a vertex buffer. And let's see, the player is drawn over here. This part down here is the player shadow. I'm going to move that down a little bit. And I'm also going to draw the player's outline around the player. I'm going to draw the player's outline first. The reason for this will not become apparent immediately, but I'll get to it soon enough. And let me run the game. And that should be all I need to do. Okay, so The game is running. You can see that there is indeed an outline around the player. And considering that I took about, I want to say about 4 minutes to do this, this isn't bad. You can see it's not perfect. You can see that if I move the camera at about a 45-degree angle relative to the world, you can see that a little bit of the outline is being drawn over the player. And I will be adjusting that in a minute, how you can fix that.
Hey.
With nothing more than a couple lines of code. But overall, it's pretty good. I can come out here where there is no lighting, and it honestly probably looks even better when there's no lighting. This is pretty good for a solid color effect. Maybe later on in the video, I'll do it to the squares and the octagon and even the sphere later too. But again, for about 4 minutes of work, that's not bad. Okay, what next? So this little effect here, where the outline of the top of the UFO ball thing is being drawn over the disc. I've talked about the depth buffer before, briefly, on I believe a couple occasions. I know I mentioned it way back in the beginning when I talked about doing skyboxes. You can turn off the depth buffer so that the depth information of the things that you draw is not saved and therefore will not, well, in complicated terms, things that you draw with the depth buffer off will not be able to include things that are drawn after it. And in simpler terms, things that you draw with the depth buffer off will not appear in front of objects that you draw later, even if the objects that you draw later are farther away from the camera.
Hey.
Because their depth information is not saved. That might be another thing that's worth giving its own video later. But for our purposes, if we want the player outline to always be drawn behind the actual player, when we draw the outline, we can simply prevent its information from being saved in the depth buffer. So we can do that with GPU set z right enable. We're going to set that to false, and afterwards we're going to set that back to true. If you remember the skybox video that I did a long time ago, the skybox essentially became the background of the camera because writing to the depth buffer was turned off when the skybox was being drawn, and therefore everything that was drawn afterwards would appear on top of it. And very much the same thing is going to happen here. So if I were to run the game now, you would see that there would be no more of the outline appearing to move through the player. You would see that if I stood here at about a 45-degree angle or so, the edges of the outline would not appear to be moving inside the disc. Same thing if I looked at it from the bottom or from a head-on-ish angle. It's not quite perfect. You can see that if I look at if I kind of look over the shoulder of the player at one of these other objects, the outline is disappearing. And that is for very much the same reason as the player. The other 3D objects in the scene are being drawn after the outline is, and since the outline's depth information is not saved, the other 3D objects in the scene will always be drawn over the player's outline as well. It's exactly the same thing that the player is doing, but unlike the player, it is not a desired effect. You can get around this by drawing the player after everything else. Let me move the shadow down as well. I'm just going to zoom in a lot, apparently. I'm going to move the player drawing and the player shadow drawing down to the bottom. Actually, let's move it below the ball also. And now when I run the game, the other objects in the scene will not be drawn over the outline. Again, it's not perfect, because there are a couple annoying issues that could potentially come with it, but it's not bad for something that got put together so quickly. Similarly to the writing to the depth buffer, you also may wish to turn on reading to the depth buffer. This is slightly less annoying, I would say, because there are fewer situations where you would see it. But if you ever move the player like halfway through another object, you would see that the outline kind of gets turned into a mess because it can be occluded by things that are in front of it, even though it can't occlude other things. You may wish to also turn off Z testing. Let's see, Z test enable when you draw the outline. This I am less convinced is a universally good idea because it would lead to some other issues. The outline will now always be drawn around the other things, but that also means if the player is partially through a wall, the outline itself is the only thing that's drawn, and that may or may not be a desired outcome, although admittedly it does look very cool when you can see like the player's ghost behind the wall. I didn't used to, I used to think this looked pretty stupid, but now that I say it that way, it's probably got its uses. Anyway, use your newfound powers wisely. Anything else? Was there anything else I wanted to mention here? If you really want to, you can make the outline 3D model part of the player's 3D model. You can kind of merge those two models together. I don't really want to do that because, as you can see, I've got the Z buffer turned off for the shadow and on for the player, and while you can manipulate the draw settings in between vertex submits and other things that you draw, you cannot manipulate the draw settings within a single vertex buffer. So you can't have part of a vertex buffer drawn with the Z buffer turned on and part of the vertex buffer with it turned off. I'm pretty sure that's all I wanted to say. I will, since I did say I would do this, and because it does sound fun, let me also do this to the cube, the octagon, and the sphere. So we'll draw an outline around these things. Is throwing the ball still part of this demo? Is that something I can do? Can I draw an outline around the ball? I don't know. I'll just do the sphere, the octagon, and the cube for now. Okay, so let's load these shapes in their outline forms. And I'm going to call that cube outline, octagon outline, and sphere outline. Like that. And then I will go into the draw event and do this for each of these things. I will not do it to the one-way wall. I don't know if I have the patience to make one for the one-way wall. Let's see. Instead of the VB player outline, we need to use the appropriate outlines for the other shapes. Octagon, cube, and sphere. And we should be good to go. So one more thing, I guess, that's worth mentioning. And that looks cool. The half of the sphere that's below the floor. This has grown on me. I used to think this looked really dumb, but this kind of silhouette effect has definitely grown on me. And likewise, the other shapes also have outlines, which is what I came here for. The sphere is also having its outline shown over on top of the cube, which may or may not be what you want, as is the octagon over there. Definitely use your new powers wisely. It's not a fancy shader effect, and we all know that I like my fancy shader effects, but it'll definitely do the job if you want a certain aesthetic in your game. One more thing to mention though, and this isn't really relevant in this particular project because I haven't been drawing these outlined objects with a texture, but if you're drawing something with a texture, for example the floor, and you draw the outline around it, or underneath it, maybe I should say more appropriately, you probably want to not use a texture when you draw it. You probably want to just use -1 for the texture to indicate no texture. The reason for that being that if you are not using a black outline, if you're using some other colored outline and you draw it with a texture, you will be able to see the texture in the outline, which is probably not what you want. To make matters worse, transparency. If the texture has transparency on it and you try to use it as an outline, it's going to look really odd. I want to try to avoid saying the words that'll look really bad, because as we saw a minute ago, I thought the outline going through the walls and stuff was going to look bad, but then I changed my mind and thought it looked really cool instead. The moral of that story being that pretty much anything can look decently good if you're going for a certain aesthetic, but definitely be aware that at the end of the day, you're still just drawing a 3D model with a texture, and if it doesn't match the aesthetic that you're going for with your game, you're probably not going to like it very much. So that's it for this video. I hope that, if nothing else, even if this isn't something that you plan on using in your game, you can see another example of how a simple, quick and dirty effect can go a long way in a game if you're looking for a certain art style. And also, if you want, you can tweak this effect, you can make it more advanced. You can use it in combination with other shaders to make it look exactly how you want. Anyway, the code for this is going to be in the video description, link to a GitHub repository. I have a Patreon, so if you want to contribute towards these videos being made, there's links to that in places as well. Otherwise, I try to post about 2 of these videos a week. One is part of a series where I make a 3D tower defense game, and another where I just talk about how to make things, as well as a bunch of Let's Play videos because I think those are fun, although that's not really related to game dev tutorials. My name is Michael. I need to go play Okami now because I need to gather reference footage, and also because Okami's a good game. I hope you found that useful, and I will see you all later. Special thanks to David Key, Edward Holt, Indie Punch, and Zenith for supporting these videos. If you want your name in the credits or to get a shoutout at the end, head on down to the Patreon page in the video description and join the fun.